Sexton by David J. Steele. Sexton Chronicles One. Chapter 1. Saturday, October 22nd, 1983. He stared at the bottom of the ravine and waited to shoot his friends. Some of the enthusiasm he felt when he took his position was gone. Tom Benton hoped this BB gun fight would turn out better than the last one. Last time they wandered around the woods, or hid, or both, and no one shot anyone before they ran out of time. He wasn't going to let that happen again. The air was cool and crisp. He could hear cars on the road a quarter-mile to the west as he listened for any sounds of his friends. Nothing so far. He could hear leaves move along the ground in the stiff breeze and the dry swaying of twigs on the bare branches overhead. He looked at his watch. 3 o'clock. The fight would end in an hour. He reached in his pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He didn't smoke, but planned to use the cigarettes as timers. He pulled out one of the 3 packages of firecrackers from the back pocket of his jeans. The red paper wrapper made more noise than he wanted when he opened the package, but that didn't bother him. His preference would be to use the noise to direct his friends to his advantage, but if he had to take a few shots to get the action going, he wasn't opposed to the idea. Shooting people was the point of this game. The rest was simply build-up. He thought for a second, then decided to leave his rifle behind. The trap would work best from the bottom of the ravine. He would be vulnerable when he set it. Without the rifle, his only option would be to run if they saw him. He went down the side of the ravine slowly, quietly, facing forward and leaning back toward the slope. 10 feet from the bottom, he stopped and looked up, scanning the top. Nothing. At the bottom, he lit a cigarette and tried not to inhale the smoke. He blew it out rather than suck it into his lungs. He crouched and swept the ground clear of leaves until he had a patch of dirt about the size of a dinner plate. He stuck the cigarette between the silver-gray strands of fuses and bent it until it lay flat on top of the fuses with the burning end 3/4 of an inch away from them. Satisfied with the noisemaker, he tucked the crumpled pack of cigarettes in his back pocket and hurried up the hill. Picking up the rifle, he resumed his position and smiled in anticipation of shooting whichever guy came into the ravine first. His smile broadened to a grin when he decided to test a new theory, a little pyrotechnic prognostication. He pulled a disposable lighter from the slash pocket of the front of his jacket, then pulled a bottle rocket from the inside pocket. It had been a long time since he played with model rockets, but he figured the bottle rocket would work the same way. A 2-stage engine, one to provide propulsion, the other to explode when the second one burned into it. If that was the case, impact with the solid object would force the second stage into the first stage, and it would explode. Rockets were cool. Missiles were cooler. There was nothing to lose. If he hit his target, and he knew his chances of that were small, the rocket would either bounce off the guy and scare him in the process, or explode on impact, or some combination thereof. Even if he missed, the whizzing sound the bottle rocket made as it screamed through the air would make the unsuspecting moron in a BB gun fight look anywhere but the origin of the shot. That would give the originator time to shoot the poor bastard with the BB in the chamber. The firecrackers went off not long after he got comfortable in his position. He expected the noise, but it still startled him. He grinned and shook his head at himself, then put the bottle rocket in the barrel and waited. It didn't take long. 2 minutes after the sound of firecrackers faded into the background, John slinked into the mouth of the ravine. He looked like some kind of SWAT team member. The blond teenager walked as quietly as he could on his big feet, shoulders hunched, neck stuck out for no apparent reason. He held his air rifle at the waist, the barrel at a slight angle up. Just like John to be safety-minded in a BB gun fight. He turned his head left and right, looking for Tom. Tom wondered what flaw of human evolution made people forget to look up when they searched for threats. The airborne rangers had it right. Death from above. Blue smoke from the firecrackers was starting to sink to the bottom of the ravine. John wrinkled his nose at the smell. His suspicions didn't come fast enough. He jerked his head to the side as the rocket hissed at him and saw a plume of blue smoke and blur of motion rush from the top of the ravine. With a startled cry that sounded far more feminine than masculine, he lurched and dove. There was a loud crack. He started to get up, dropping the rifle to push himself to his knees. A blinding white flash of pain hit him in the buttocks, driving him face down in the leaves. "Damn it!" he screamed. "That hurts! I give! I give!" His hands were in the air, muscles frozen as he listened. There was only silence. It made him more nervous than the sound of laughter would have. Tom was watching him, hunting him. Andy's braying laughter would have sprayed all over the ravine and made it very clear who had the upper hand. The lack of laughter proved it was Tom. And it was never good when that little bastard had the advantage. He wouldn't hesitate to use it, every time. "Psst! Hey!" He looked for the sound. Andy was at the top of the ravine on his left, his round face split in a grin. His crossman was resting on his left knee, aimed toward the end of the ravine. He pointed at something and nodded. John followed his finger. What the hell is he thinking? If he thinks I'm going to charge up the side of this thing just so he can get a shot at Tom, while Tom takes a shot at me, he can forget it. For half a second he thought about shooting Andy himself, but gave up on the idea when he realized that would mean he'd end up with two guys shooting down at him if he did. He chose instead to give Andy the old one-fingered salute. John smiled and waved his other hand toward the mouth of the ravine. You go ahead, buddy, he thought. It's your turn to get shot. Andy looked down at his friend and gave serious consideration to shooting the big lug. John must have realized what he was thinking. His grin faded and he looked around for some place to hide. They stared at each other too long. He heard the small pop of a BB gun being fired. A split second later the little ball smacked into John's leg. He howled and fell to the ground, clutching his thigh and swearing loudly. Trying not to cackle, Andy hit the dirt. Tom must be hiding at the top of the ravine where the two ends come together. He reached behind his back under his jacket and pulled out the BB pistol he bought for just such an emergency. He pushed himself up on his knees and eased back to his feet. His breath came in puffs as he glanced at the leaves on the ground and mustered his courage. BBs were small and didn't break the skin, but they did hurt. Hurt a lot, in fact. The only thing that eased the pain was inflicting equal or greater pain on a good friend. The woods were too quiet. Every slide of his feet rattled with exaggerated volume through the leaves. He listened intently, so intently his heartbeat sounded like thunder in his ears. A small sound in front and slightly to the right made him stop. He wasn't sure what it was. It might have been a twig snapping somewhere, maybe even under his own foot. He pressed his shoulder against the trunk of a tree and peered around it. There was Tom, his back to him, looking down at John in the ravine. Tom shook his head, probably deciding if it would be more fun to shoot John again or watch him try to figure out how to get out of the line of fire and then shoot him again. Andy put the butt of his rifle on the ground and leaned the barrel against the tree. He sucked in a deep breath and moved away. Tom didn't turn. It looked like he was concentrating on John, which meant Andy didn't have time to waste. He raised the BB pistol in a two-handed grip and pulled the trigger 3 times. There was no recoil, just 3 rapid pfft. 3 smacks of BBs colliding with Tom's back reached his ears as he jerked behind the tree. He was panting, not from the fast move, but from the exhilaration of shooting prey that can shoot back. There was supposed to be a thunk as Tom hit the ground in pain, but he didn't hear one. A rifle shot at that range would have put him on the ground. Evidently the pistol shots didn't pack as much pain. Still, 3 hits should have done something. Tom was in pain, but not agony. Even through his thick jacket and the sweater under it, there was no way to mistake the stab of a small lead ball smashing into the body at 500 feet per second. He wasn't sure how many times he'd been hit. The stinging pains merged in his back in one big splat of ticked-off nerves. He gritted his teeth under the tight lips and resisted the urge to cuss. He let his air rifle fall. A small part of his brain considered John and dismissed him as a threat. He couldn't climb the slope fast enough. He wouldn't be there in time to help Andy. A cold grin crossed his lips and made him almost forget the pain. Standing calmly, he made no effort to hide as he listened and looked into the trees. Seconds passed, then what felt like a minute. Andy was still hiding. This was now a game of patience and preparation. His skin burned from the BBs, but there was no way to tell from the smile on his lips. Time for a little psychobabble. "You bought a pistol, didn't you?" His voice echoed in the cold air. No reply, just the sounds of John crashing his way up the ravine. The guy was as subtle as a lawnmower. "I suppose using a pistol isn't cheating. We never said it's against the rules." He didn't mention his own pistol and grinned when he pulled it from the shoulder holster under his jacket to hold it in front of him, his legs spread to shoulder width. He stared straight ahead, but he was looking for movement from the corners of his eyes. With a roar, Andy dove from behind the tree, rolled 3 times, and came up shooting. It was a good move, not very smooth, but good. By the time his eyes found Tom and focused, he'd sent 3 more BBs at the little guy. They missed. His eyes locked with Tom's. They widened when they saw his pistol and Tom's half grin that made his face look like a wink was on the way. The wink of an executioner with a warped sense of humor. He didn't take time to think. He shot. So did Tom. They were only about 30 feet apart, both shooting as fast as they could pull their triggers. Andy ran out of ammo first. 6 of his 13 shots were gone before their standoff, but Tom's was full. By the time the shooting stopped, both were lying on the ground rolling in pain. They laughed and cussed at each other in whispers through clenched teeth. "Truce!" Andy shouted as he threw himself on his back and laughed in puffs at the sky. "Man, that hurts! Oh, man!" He sat up and curled his shoulders toward his knees, turned his head and looked over the ground at Tom. "Was that all 16 shots?" He laughed again and was sorry he did. It brought a wince and a wheeze. Tom wobbled on his knees. His angular face was split in a blend of grin and grimace. In answer to Andy's question, he raised the pistol and shot him in the thigh. "Damn it!" Andy shouted. "A simple no would have been enough." John stopped trying to be quiet and charged up the hill toward the shouting. He crashed through the brush and found them leaning against a tree, laughing and trying to catch their breath. "What did you two do to each other?" Tom grinned, looked at Andy, and winked. "Do you think he really wants to know?" Andy nodded. Tom returned the nod, looked at Andy, smiled at John, said "this," and shot John in the leg. The guy didn't appreciate the humor of the situation. He was too busy biting back a scream as he fell to the ground, clutching his leg. Andy laughed until he had wiped tears from his eyes with a knuckle. His laughter was infectious. Pistol's empty. They were only halfway sure Tom's was empty. They decided it was time to go home. Just before they left the woods and entered the cul-de-sac at the end of Tom's street, he stopped. Andy and John stood next to him, silent. Tom pointed at a small red pickup truck parked in the roundabout with the passenger side toward them. They could see the heads and shoulders of two of their mutual friends poking over the top of the front and back of the truck. It was Mike and Greg. Their eyes slid over the woods as they scanned the trees. Both guys held BB guns. In Greg's case, it was a little kid's BB gun with a cocking handle action rather than a pump. Andy laughed behind his fist, wondering if the BB gun was a real Red Ryder with a compass in the stock, like in the movie The Christmas Story. He turned and mouthed, "Ambush?" Tom nodded, and his eyes glinted in the sun with an amused blue flash. He pointed at John and gestured to the right in half a circle. Andy waited for Tom to turn to him. He looked at him and cocked his head to the left. Tom nodded, pointed at himself, then the BB pistol strapped to his side, then at the truck. He watched them sneak to their positions while his heart beat faster and he tried to look calm. The last thing he wanted to do was spook the two guys behind the truck. Shooting them and thwarting their ambush would be the perfect end to the perfect BB gun fight. The guys were willing to shoot him the second he walked out of the woods. That was all right. He could handle it. He hoped they would miss, thought at least one of them would miss, and decided he could live with the worst-case scenario of both shots hitting him. Their little pop guns wouldn't hurt much, but they didn't know that. Neither one of them had been shot yet. He took 2 steps over the mown grass and heard Mike shout, "Now!" Both guys fired, and both guys missed. Tom laughed, dropping the air rifle and pulling the pistol from the holster slowly, with more show than force. Mike and Greg stood up straight when they realized Tom was still on his feet. His ugly black pistol took them by surprise, and their faces showed it. Neither wanted to find out what it was like to take a hit from the ugly thing in Tom's hands. Mike moved first. "Sorry, Tom, we thought those other guys would be with you. We wouldn't have ganged up on you on purpose." Tom lowered the pistol and smiled. If either one of them knew him better, they would have known the smile on his face was as genuine as it was warm. "I'm glad you guys fight fair. 2 on 1 isn't fair. Then again, neither is 3 on 2. They looked at each other, not understanding what he meant. Before they could figure it out, they felt hot flashes of pain from John and Andy's shots from the side. By the time they recovered, the 3 targets of their ambush were facing them. Tom stood in front, the pistol in his left hand pointed at the ground. Andy was on their left with his pistol trained on Mike's chest. John stood casually on Greg's right with his air rifle on his hip, pointed in the direction of what he hoped was his belt buckle. They looked at the other 3. Tom wished he had a picture of their faces. Checkmate. Neither team dared move toward their BB guns. They got up slowly, laughing nervously at first, then with enthusiasm. Greg coughed and said, "You win." Tom let him sweat for a minute. "See you in school." A laugh, a shrug, and then, "Do you want us to invite you to the fight next time, or should we save you the trouble of coming all the way out here and just shoot you at home?" Mike shook his head. His red hair shuffled in the stiff breeze. His ass still hurt from the shot. He didn't need this kind of fun in his life. Not now, not ever again.